Right praise, right relationship. It's been the theme that I've developed now for the last couple of weeks, and this brings it to a conclusion. You know, for me, for so much of my life, I never truly understood what it meant to praise, to give God right praise. Something I've struggled with again and again because it's not as obvious as one might think. We all think we might have it down. We all think we might know and we might get it. You know, I was thinking about certain situations, if you will. We all love one of those stories where someone goes from rags to riches. You know, that person that's like, their life is destitute, they're desperate, they don't know what's going on, and by some fortune, all of a sudden, they've built up a good income, they become maybe even famous, like a J.K. Rowling. Everybody loves the story of a J.K. Rowling, how, you know, there she was destitute, and the next thing you know, she's got these worldwide books that everybody's reading. We love to hear those stories so much because they're inspiring. They remind us just how powerful, the Lord can be for some people and how he can help people, presuming that he was the one that helped them. But how often do we hear those stories of someone who goes from riches to rags? Those don't make the news, do they? They very rarely make the news, if ever, because nobody likes to hear those stories, do they? They don't like to hear how someone was once rich and powerful and lost it all and is now living on the streets. And yet it does happen. You know, there was an interesting story. See, what happens a lot of times with the riches to rags people, the riches to rags people, in some cases, did it with intent. They actually did it with intent. There was a great story I read just the other day, a real story of a very super powerful lawyer, Wall Street lawyer, was making money hands over fist, owned a big, huge house in so many different places. His name is Dale Raccinelli. Now, I bet none of you have ever heard of him. He's been on EWTN. That's how famous his story. Big, huge, powerful lawyer making huge amounts of money, wielding power like you wouldn't believe. May not know him, but had an encounter with Jesus Christ. Had a direct encounter with Jesus Christ. In fact, to the point where he stood before the judgment seat and heard the Lord speak judgment to him, showing him his entire life, showing him all the sins that he had committed, showing him all the problems that he had caused, all of the hurts that he had done. And he was so radically touched by it that both he and his wife renounced their riches, and he became a chaplain in a prison to people on death row, and lives a very simple and humble life nowadays, just living a nice, quiet existence in Florida. We don't hear those stories, do we? The news media certainly doesn't want to tell you that there's going to be a judgment. That just goes without saying. You're not going to, no big news outlet is going to go, oh, this rich guy had a vision of Jesus, found out that he's going to burn in hell for all eternity and decided to turn his life around. It just doesn't seem to happen. I don't know why. But we don't hear those stories. But sometimes it's good for us to refresh ourselves with stories like that. Now, he's a living person right now on this earth, but I always love to turn to the lives of the saints. How many of us today spend any time really examining the lives of the saints? And there have been some great riches to rags stories in the sainthood that we have. I mean, think about some of the great saints that renounced riches and took on poverty. St. Francis is one of the obvious ones. His father was very wealthy. He was inheriting that wealth. And yet he takes his clothes off and throws them in the center square, embraces poverty, and founded the Franciscans. To this day, the Franciscans still try to follow that same rule of poverty. Or think of some of the other great saints that are out there. I mean, we all know about St. Mother Teresa, her life. A powerful witness of saying, I don't need all the creature comforts and the pleasures of this world because my investment is in God. One of my favorite saints, and I have to admit, I didn't really know much about St. Therese of Lisieux. She's such a beautiful saint, but I really knew nothing about her for a long, long time. And I had the opportunity to go on a pilgrimage, and one of the stops was in Lisieux. And I really knew nothing about this saint. I knew that everybody loved her. I didn't know why. Everybody loved St. Therese of Lisieux. Everybody loved her. The little flower, the little way. And there we are on pilgrimage, and I'm listening to the guide giving us information and showing us her home and all of these things. And she was one who had a very comfortable living. Her parents had 9 children, 4 of which died at birth. She was one of 5. They had a comfortable life, and yet she wanted to renounce all of that to become a nun. To the point where this ornery little 15-year-old had already decided that she was going to have this happen one way or another, and even went to Rome, went to the Pope and said, you have to give me dispensation so that I can enter the order early. I wanted to know more about the saint, so I asked the guide, what can I do? I'd really love to know more about St. Therese. She goes, oh, there's a great autobiography, Story of a Soul, you have to get it. And they had it in the bookstore, so I got myself a copy. But I'll be honest with you, it wasn't kind of what I expected. I don't know if you ever read A Story of a Soul. It wasn't what I expected. As a guy reading these memoirs from basically a young girl, she died at 24, it just seemed very girlish to me. I don't know how else to say it. It was just one of those things where I'm not really getting it. I'm not really getting inspired by it. So when I finished it the first time, I was like, I don't know what people are making such a big thing about. But I said, you know what? I can't give up on this one because there's something special about St. Therese. And so I read it again. It was in the second reading that I began to see through the stories that were there and the truth she was revealing. The little way. Things like, do little things with great love. It's a rule that we could all live by. Do little things with great love. That is right praise. That's getting my relationship right with God, doing the little things that He has. We all have little tasks every day. And parents of children especially, the little tasks you give your children to do, what's their usual attitude? Grumble, grumble, grumble. Oh, why do I have to do this? This is so dumb. But doing the little things with great love. Such a simple way. Such a simple axiom that can help us in all of our relationships. But doing it with great love means I'm going to do this for God. I'm not doing it to satisfy or to win the esteem or the status of anybody else. I'm going to do this with great love because that's who I am. That's who God is. And when I even reach out to the poor or help someone in distress or help somebody through a difficult time, that's a form of right praise because it forms a right relationship with God and with another. Today we're confronted by a gospel that really should make every single one of us uncomfortable. It really should. Today's gospel is one of those gospels, and it follows right on from last week's gospel. So this one really kind of is like a transition point in this chapter. It's really a transition point because here we have this parable that Jesus throws at us that we all go, well, of course, that Pharisee was an obnoxious individual. What an attitude he was copying. How dare he stand before the Lord and brag on himself? We all get that. But how many of us are more like the tax collector? I would bet a good portion of us are not. I'd bet a good portion of us are not. Because when we don't have right praise, we don't have right disposition. When we cop an attitude, especially when we cop an attitude with God, oh boy, I don't want to find out at judgment just what the payment back is going to be for trying to tell God that I'm a great person. And yet some of us, that's our pride that creeps in. We live in a world that tells us, brag on yourself, exalt yourself, live the high life. Go ahead. The more you have, the more you accumulate, the more things, the better. And when you don't have enough of it, go get more of it and just keep doing it and keep doing it. And no matter who you have to trample upon in between and no matter what it takes. That's our world today. It's probably been the world since Adam and Eve, but we have to admit that we're all driven by our things, by our possessions, by our as I heard it said the other day, it's like, we're given a little cart at the beginning of life. We have to just keep filling it up and keep filling it up and keep filling it up with stuff. but that doesn't get us into heaven. In fact, I will say this, the only thing you will ever be able to carry into heaven with you is that which you've given away. Anything that you possess, anything you take, guess what? When you get to the pearly gates, it's not coming through with you. I don't care how special your car is. I don't care how fancy your dinner set is. I don't care how many people that you've entertained with these lavish dinners and everything else. It's what you gave away that will go into heaven with you. And that's a powerful thing. That second letter to Timothy, it's all in there. St. Paul has said, I figured it out. I'm pouring myself out like a libation. I've reached the end and I know I have to continue. And I'm going to empty myself for the Lord. Great advice from this elder to this young Timothy who's now just picking up the mantle. Great advice for me. I have to admit, right praise is hard. Right praise is hard because it's the way we live our lives. It's how we are in relationship to God. It's how we relate to Him personally, as if there was nothing else in our life. God has to be the one, the only. And that's, I think, the real struggle, because right praise, we think, you know what? I'll do right praise. All right, I said my rosary, I did a little quick prayer, I read the scriptures, I'm done with praise, and let me get back to cheating people. Let me get back to lying and slandering and doing all those things that I enjoy doing so much. No, right praise is I live God always, and I praise Him with the beauty of my life. We can turn to the Blessed Mother. We could turn to St. Therese of Lisieux. We could turn to St. Francis of Assisi. We could turn to any of the great saints. If you don't know their lives, get to know them better. I highly recommend The Story of a Soul. I really do. I recommend that everybody read it and learn this little way, because from this humble young woman, the world was turned upside down. Died at 24. They printed these little memoirs thinking they weren't going to go anywhere, and the demand for them became so great so quickly, the order couldn't keep up printing them. There's something about it. And so stick with it if you do read it. It is something that can change our lives, for our lives need to be changed today. Just like this Dale Raccinelli, whose life was turned around by an encounter with Christ. We have to continually encounter Christ and let our lives be turned over, surrendered, given to Him in right praise, so that we will always have a right relationship with Him. The one thing that Dale found out was judgment is real, and you can't make excuses before the Lord. He even says in his own thing, he even says how he was standing before the Lord, and he starts to go, well, I took care of my children in that big, huge house that I bought, realizing as his words was coming out of his mouth, they weren't going to hold with the Lord. So we need to work on ourselves, my dear brothers and sisters. At the heart of right praise has to be qualities like humility. Has to be qualities like humility. We can't be proud before the Lord and win a hearing. And so all the bragging we can do on ourselves when we get to the pearly gates isn't going to cut it. But if we can stand before the Lord and just say, Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner, that's the words that will lift you up. Those will be the words that will raise your soul. Those simple, easy words, Lord, I need you, even though you don't really need me. I still need you. Be merciful to me, a sinner. Those words are right praise. God bless you.